Things are heating up. Boiling to death was a thing, or depending on who you ask, is still a thing. So death by being boiled to death, at least there's a good amount of both verified and unverified accounts throughout history where people were boiled to death. It wasn't a super common execution method compared to like hanging or anything like that, but it did exist. Hey everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Casper, and I'm a historian with a lot of other work and travel experience. I've taught a bit on the side, and my current field of work is in world history from the 19th to 20th century, and I've been asked what I think of Shogun as a historian. If you'd like to see more content like this, definitely subscribe to the channel. So here we go. I will say there's a lot of things I really like here, and in the rest of the show, there's a lot of really good choices with the costuming. I think the costumes for not just the daimyos or just the Japanese attire is really well done. I have a feeling they probably consulted a lot of historical art and sources on the clothing, and I think that is a big part of why a lot of people like this show, because it just feels like you are in that era when you watch it. Another really cool detail I've noticed throughout the show is also the seating arrangements. Even in Western cultures, there's a thing where if at a table, at a dinner table or something, the head of the household or the head of the family sits at the end of the table or sits at the head of the table. And a lot of the seating arrangements we just saw in the scene here kind of, I guess, drip down into throughout time into what seating arrangements or seating etiquette can be in Japan, but also, you know, there are parts of different parts of Asia, including Korea, that see to how you sit, where you sit. So that's really cool that they paid attention to so many details here, because if you look at the seating arrangements throughout the scene, the guards, that not just any guards, but the honor guards are seated outside the main hall here in this audience chamber. Meanwhile, the lords themselves are in here along with some attendants before they meet. I think another thing I do want to point out here, and it happens in like every other episode of Shogun, is this usage of lighting, but also the usage of shadow. And using shadows actively is a big part in the Japanese arts and in Chinese art as well. So what I mean by this is the active usage of shadow. You're not, you know, a lot of people are obsessed with illuminating the interior of their homes and such, to the point that there's like really no shadow, but the Japanese really loved playing with the concept of the absence of light making something. And this is perfectly exemplified by a lot of the opinions that Junichiro Tanizaki expresses in his book In Praise of Shadows, where, you know, it's not just about illumination, but it's also about using the shadows or the absence of light to also, like, in a weird way, illuminate what's going on in both theater or even in home decor. So I really do like that even in here, in this hall, that there is just enough light, but it's not like it's super bright. Everyone is illuminated by the light, but there are shadows. And I think that really, artistically speaking for the show, that really does play heavily in the atmosphere of certain scenes. And it definitely kind of borrows some inspiration from Japanese theater in that regard.
乱世は終わりを告げ申した石堂殿。それがしがこの城の人質でないのと同様、落ち葉の方様も江戸の人質などではござりません。
太后様が生きておられたら、何と仰せになられるか。
我ら5人が未だいがみ合うておる様に苦笑いなさっているに違いございません。
There's a lot to break down here. So there's two things. The first thing is I just love the double speak, as I like to call it, and it basically is in some form to this day in East Asia, at least from my experience and my upbringing. So it's kind of like where you say one thing, but you mean another thing, but you saying it in a way where you can't really be called out on it. And that's kind of what is being displayed here. And I feel like with a lot of the dialogue between one of the main characters, Anjin, and who's based on William Adams, and the other surrounding characters who are of Japanese origin, kind of like this way to communicate without offending, or a way to communicate by communicating enough to convey more. Really love it. It's very familiar to me, whether that's unfortunate or fortunate. And I do love that even the political dialogues employ it, but much more slippery than the kind of business interaction between the lady of the brothel and I believe it was Lady Mariko when they were conducting a transaction, right? Even in that kind of exchange, there is doublespeak, and it's here as well, and I love it. The second thing I want to talk about is his remark, or Toranaga's remark, and Toranaga is based on, again, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who would establish the Tokugawa shogunate after this whole Council of Five Elders matter, for the most part, was resolved. So I'm not sure exactly how many people watched the show, knowing the historical time period it's the story is based in, or the historical context of what's going on. But I felt like the show made it feel like it was a very regional or local dispute between these guys, but this is actually on a nationwide scale, or I guess nation-state scale. And this was an actual thing. This was the Council of Five Elders. And the Council of Five Elders were basically the top five daimyo, both militarily and politically, very strong daimyo or feudal lords handpicked by Toyotomi Hideyoshi before he died, to make sure that his dynasty or lineage would continue through his son, Toyotomi Hideyori. And what the remark here was from Toranaga, who's again based on Tokugawa Ieyasu, is that, hey, if he were still alive, he'd be really happy seeing that we can't all agree with each other. And, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was very... I don't want to say was, because there's still a lot of theories right now among some historians who do study this field on his personality and kind of like his motives as an individual behind a lot of the things he did. But it's generally accepted that he was very, very, very smart. He was very politically savvy. He pitted rivals against one another. And that's kind of exactly what he did with the Council of Five Elders, not just in ensuring that his lineage will continue, or dynasty will continue in some sort of Toyotomi shogunate, but also that after he died, his rivals and these also very ambitious men would keep each other in check. So that's what the comment was, and I think that was a very clever piece of dialogue there, and a nod towards actual history. One thing I do want to also mention is, why not Shogun? Why is there no Shogun? I think a lot of people probably have that in the back of their mind. Why is there no Shogun? Why isn't Toyotomi Hideyori, or the kid who's based on the person from history, a shogun already? Why is there no shogunate? Well, and part of the reason is, well, the previous shogunate had collapsed, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who unified Japan after following Oda Nobunaga, it's commonly held that because of his peasant background, he couldn't go as far as being a shogun or claiming a shogunate, which is why he settled for, I guess, Taiko or Kampuku. And it's basically imperial regent. And it's basically the title held a lot of meanings. And of course, him being a peasant may have actually obstructed them. So yeah, that's basically what's going on here. Things are heating up. Boiling to death was a thing, or depending on who you ask, is still a thing. So death by being boiled to death, at least there's a good amount of both verified and unverified accounts throughout history where people were boiled to death. It wasn't a super common execution method compared to like hanging or anything like that, but it did exist, and it was definitely as painful as the show depicts. Definitely as gruesome as you might imagine. The method of boiling someone alive. Of course, there were different methods to the method, like how hot is the water or tar or whatever substance you want to put in before you throw them in, which determine more gruesome details that I won't go into. But yes, unfortunately, humans were very creative at killing each other.
殿、失礼いたします。石堂様がお見えにござりまする。
どうせ。
はっ。
わしが朝鮮兵のムクロの山から引きずり出してやった立派な侍だよ。
いやはや、拙者のその知力を金輪際忘れさせてはくださらぬ。誇り高き総大将ではござらぬ。
So I love this dialogue here because there's a actually not kernel, but a big nugget of history, and a few other characters in the show in a couple episodes also refer to Chosun or Korea, and this is referring to actually the 1592 to 1598 Imjin War. It was an incredibly devastating war. This was 2 invasions of Japanese armada and armies to the Korean Peninsula in Toyotomi Hideyoshi's bid to secure power not just on the Korean Peninsula, but to also advance eventually into Ming China. And I find this very cool because a lot of these guys would actually be veterans from this incredibly devastating war where hundreds of thousands of people died. And it was a very violent and gruesome war too, to the point where essentially in the end, nothing was achieved, at least from the Japanese kind of strategic point of view. And for the Koreans and for the Ming Chinese, it was also incredible waste of resources and would actually affect the economy, both countries' economies, or both nation states' economies for quite a while after that. So what does this mean? Because actually there's a scene in the show where Anjin is showing them this like brilliant accuracy of, or the importance of artillery accuracy, at least on land or land warfare, of cannons. And I found that scene to be a little amusing or a little funny, kind of like implying that the Japanese didn't understand the importance of, artillery warfare or the importance of accuracy when it comes to cannons. And after this war, which, this show is based in the time period right after that war, after this war where they lost due to a variety of factors, by the way, logistics, guerrilla warfare, and of course, the Ming Chinese bringing in land artillery. The Koreans also famously, through Izun cutting off supplies and, fleet movements with the usage of naval artillery, accurate naval artillery. The Japanese are not stupid. They would be like, this is really important. We gotta research this. We should know that this is very important, not just for, naval warfare or even for castle sieges, but maybe we should try to look at this as an attempt to maybe incorporate this into land warfare. And there were attempts, actually, if you look at past weapons that were developed by the Japanese for land artillery or infantry artillery. So there's also other factors into why maybe, cannons were not as prominent with Japan as much as it was with other gunpowder empires or gunpowder nation states. And that's mainly to do with probably cost. And of course, I think that scene also was trying to show that the Portuguese were holding back on the Japanese, or at least the British artillery was probably different, or I don't want to start a war, but was better than the Portuguese cannons in terms of accuracy. So I get that, but this is a really important piece of dialogue, as I say, because it is referring to a very big war that happened right before the show took place, which influenced the domestic politics of Japan as well. So this is the guy that interrupted the meeting of the Council of Five Elders earlier in the first episode, and he stepped in with his hand on the hilt of his sword, ready to defend his lord from the insults, Lord Toranaga or Tokugawa, from the other lords or from the other elders, or what he perceived as insults. So in order to atone for his mistake of dishonoring both himself and his lord, he's offered to kill himself in what we know as seppuku, ritual suicide. So he also offers, interestingly, to also end his bloodline by killing his infant son. A lot of people on the internet were very aghast or horrified by the scene, apparently. Really, an infant? And in all my readings and research, I have not been able to find a seppuku with an infant involved. Typically, there's a lot of things to look at here. Typically, seppuku, you can look at it as punishment more so than atonement, but it could serve as both. Seppukus weren't like super like common. It didn't happen like every day or anything like that. Otherwise, there would be not a lot of the cast left that does participate in seppuku. It was certainly in some aspects a way to avoid conflict, and there's a general kind of understanding, especially in the setting of the Japanese archipelago, where conflict can get out of control, and it could end up in a disaster for everyone. So a lot of that can be explained in the culture that people see with Japan or some other areas of the world where people are more non-confrontational or less direct in hopes to avoid conflict. So seppuku, yes, it was punishment. It could be used as a way to show sincerity or to protest. There are famous cases where people did commit seppuku even in the modern age to, show that, hey, I don't like this. I'm going to kill myself. And there's a beautiful scene with Anjin, I think, somewhere later in these episodes where he kind of gets frustrated and yells out, "You people have no regard for life. You guys are obsessed with death. Like, well, do you even care?" And I think that is both a self-reflection of, like, even us today, where we kind of gripe with death. We kind of struggle to understand how this natural part of life is not the antithesis of life, but also just part of it, and how we deal with it. But also kind of a portrayal of East meets West. I don't personally like to think of it like that, because to me, from Anjin's perspective, it opens up a new perspective on the preservation of life through death. So I think it was Professor Yamamoto Hirofumi of the University of Tokyo, who unfortunately passed away several years ago, I believe. He once remarked that it is no exaggeration to say that samurai were born to see their family lines continued. And again, this speaks on the idea that if you kill yourself, you're saving others, or you're saving your family potentially, or avoiding conflict. So that's one way to look at this. But again, I don't know of any instance where infants were involved in seppuku. But also, from another perspective, I don't think this would have happened even if perhaps he did act very boldly or was rude in the presence of the Council of Five Elders. You have to remember that the context here is that they're all trying to avoid conflict to some extent, or not one way or another. Maybe there will be political assassinations or political plots, but outright war is something it feels like, at least from the first episode, a lot of the entire Council of Elders is kind of trying to avoid here. There's hostage taking, which was very common, and there's a lot of ways to avoid war, and one way to kind of instigate war is to have one of your loyal retainers put to death on behalf of your rivals. And this, a lot of people kind of get a bit too I guess immersed in the archetype of the samurai or the Bushido, where you're loyal to the very end. Well, politics, and loyalties could be very easily swayed, as demonstrated by the Battle of Sekigahara. So, if Toranaga was like, yeah, kill this guy who's really loyal to me. Oh, by the way, he's also related to me. That's not gonna really fly well in actual history with his other retainers. But also, there was a chance as well, because this is also a big part of the politics here, where kind of like the seeds of Neo-Confucianism is starting to take root in terms of like how you act and how one should behave in relation to others in Japan. The host, once offered this guy offering to kill himself and his lineage by killing a baby. They could have said no. And that would have probably put them in a much better light while also avoiding conflict. So I don't know if this seppuku would actually have happened. There were also other options, many other options for dealing with people who acted out of place, so to speak. There was an option to exile. It wasn't just death. There was an option for other kinds of punishments apart from having them commit suicide. So yeah, I don't know about this scene personally. I think someone maybe more well-versed in Japanese history could step in here and be like, okay, maybe this could have happened. Now, there is something similar, or maybe not similar, but something like this happened where before the ascension of Tokugawa Ieyasu to the seat of Shogun, his wife, Tsukiyama, was accused of conspiring to kill his lord Oda Nobunaga. And she was ordered to kill herself. And there's a scene actually in Shogun where Lady Mariko is about to kill herself. And it is actually historically accurate. Women would not slit their bellies in their suicides. Typically, they slit their throats or they went for the heart. And there are some accounts with long hairpins being used rather than knives, which I think is more painful than knife. But yeah, I digress. So Tsukiyama was ordered to kill herself. She killed herself. And of course, Tokugawa Ieyasu actually ordered house arrest on his eldest, Tokugawa Nobuyasu, who was the son of Tsukiyama, because he believed that his son would seek revenge, and that's a no-go. So he was also ordered to basically commit suicide. So not exactly an infant, but still there are instances of family members being ordered or being pressured to commit suicide for the sake of kind of keeping stability. So the concept, I think, interesting. I don't know about the baby again. It's definitely dramatized, and I mean that's fine. It's historical fiction, and it's really meant to show the difference in cultures too. And if you think the meeting between the Japanese and Portuguese, or the Japanese, or this isolated nations, or kind of this isolated state, and the rest of the world is alien, well, my goodness, there's more alien encounters between the inhabitants of the New World and the Old World, or the Americas and Europe, that we could definitely look at in another video.
我が国元の江戸にキリシタン教会の建設を許す。
He's giving us a church in Edo.
その代わり、大老の木山と大野の件についてわしを助けてもらいたい。
どういうことでしょう?
So it is true. Christianity started to spread in Japan around this time period with the arrival of the Jesuit missionaries. It was not an insignificant number of converts, as you would think. There were actually hundreds of thousands of recorded Christian converts of native Japanese Christians. It was actually, ironically, Blackthorne, I believe is his name in the show, based on William Adams. It was partly because of his influence in foreign policy with the Tokugawa shogunate, and also a the other added factor of potential rebellions that basically prompted Tokugawa shogunate to essentially expel the Christian missionaries eventually, sometime in the early 17th century. Excuse me. So eventually, the Christians are suppressed, and that's a whole different other story or history. And the expulsion of foreigners happens, and of course, there's like limited trade between Korea, China. We have some trade between Japan and Macau, some outposts out on some islands. We also do have some Dutch traders, but for the most part, after the 17th century, there are no more Jesuit missionaries. And I do again, I really love the costuming here. But I think that's it for our reaction to Shogun. If you want more, let me know. And I hope you enjoyed my off the top of my head insights.